Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome to the WP Builds podcast. Nice to have you with us once more. This is episode number 253, entitled W is for Writing. It was published on Thursday, the 4th of November 2021. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and I'll be joined, as I am so often, in a few minutes by my good friend David Wormsley, so that we can have our discussion. We're going through the A to Z of WordPress, and we're really close to the end because we're on W, like I said, is for writing. But before we get into that, just a few bits of housekeeping. I am putting together a Black Friday deals page. It's slowly building up as people send me their deals. You can find it, though, as you always can, wpbuilds.com/black. One more time, wpbuilds.com/black. It's a searchable and filterable list of WordPress specific deals. That might be plugins, themes, hosting, and some SaaS apps thrown in for good measure as well. But I would really appreciate it if you want to bookmark that page and use it. There are a few affiliate links that go in there, and that helps to keep the lights on over at WP Builds. But the idea is to make it your one-stop shop so that every deal is on there. If by any chance I have missed a deal out, there is a button on there. It's a blue button, and I believe it says add your deal. And if I've missed something, please go and fill out that form, and I'll try to get it on the site as quickly as I can. Please keep heading back though, because as I said, things are going to be added as and when I receive them, and what's on there today might not be what's on there tomorrow. But it's a busy period. I know that lots of people put some money to one side in order to make a good investment at a time of year when everything seems to go berserk in terms of offers off. So once more, wpbuilds.com/black to make use of that. If you would like to keep in touch with all that we do at WP Builds, head over to our subscribe page. It will come as no surprise that it's wpbuilds.com/subscribe, and fill out the form over there, and we will keep you up to date. There is actually a specific email list. If you look, there's two forms on that page. One of them is to keep in touch with all of the content that we produce. So that would be things, for example, like the podcast episodes that you're listening to now. The other form is to keep you in touch with deals, and so particularly around the Black Friday time, that might be a good idea to fill that one out because they're two separate lists. So you're looking for the blue one on the WP Build subscribe page. Okay, that's all of the housekeeping out of the way. So this week I'm chatting to David Wormsley all about W is for writing. When we started out thinking about this topic, we didn't actually think there was an awful lot in it. We were thinking about things like fonts and SEO, but then the more we got into it, the more we started to think about all the different things that are involved in writing. So for example, the interface. Are we becoming dumbed down with things like Twitter? Do we now no longer care about who is the custodian, who owns that content? Do we now have to worry more about mixed content, so throwing video and GIFs and images at our writing as well? And in the future, what about AI? Is that going to take the job of writing good content away? There's loads in this episode, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Hello, it's another A to Z of WordPress, a series where we attempt to cover all the major aspects of building and maintaining sites with WordPress. Today is W for writing. And, well, to be honest, when we said we would do this one, it was going to be because of the fact that we'd used up B and we couldn't have it on blogging. But Nathan, you've come up with so many kind of areas we can talk about when it comes to writing and WordPress.
Can I just say, doesn't writing start with an R? I think we got the wrong letter. Very funny, Nathan. Yeah, W for writing. There's absolutely loads in this, and it just sort of splurged out, didn't it? There was so many different things that we didn't really think about at the beginning. You know, we started thinking about all the typical stuff like fonts and typography and all of that, and then loads of things came to mind. So if you're a blogger, probably a lot of this will have occurred to you. Where should we start?
Well, this is kind of random order, really. So we'll start with, should we talk about web fonts? Because that's been something I'm into recently.
Sure.
Mainly because of performance and all that. I've been doing some content on using different things. And so many exciting things going on with picking fonts. Because there's all what Google's doing at the moment with these variable fonts. I don't know if you know about that.
Well, the only reason I know about it because I watched your video, but it would be quite interesting.
Yeah.
Just give us like the 30-second lowdown because it's great.
Yeah, well, previously, I mean, fonts have been changing all the time. It's been difficult to deliver anything other than just system fonts. And they've been heavy, and we've needed to support different browser types. And pretty much now, the support is there for Google's format, which is WUF2. So we can slim it down pretty much now to one type of file. But what they've done now is instead of having to deliver different weights with different files, they've got this variable font, which is just one, which will deliver all the different ranges of weights that you could have, and actually weights within the typical weights, so it's fully variable. And there's all sorts of stuff, adaptive fonts they're working on as well, where you get much more control about how you kind of manipulate the individual characters and the kerning and that kind of stuff that I don't really understand. So I think it's exciting times really for web fonts.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's all being packaged up in one file, if you like. So rather than having all the different weights and everything, which obviously is multiple things, now it's all going to be rolled into one. I've got to say, I know obviously you're keen on it and you made that YouTube video and what have you. I think I'm almost immune to noticing fonts, in that if a font is spectacularly bad, like Comic Sans bad, then I will see it and I will think, ugh. But typically, whatever a website displays to me, I'll just sort of accept it as what it is. And I don't sort of find myself remarking, oh, that's a nice font. Obviously, other people do, but it's just not something that really occurs to me. If it's readable, the font size, I think, is more crucial to me. I actually discovered, to my horror this week, that there was a setting on my phone which will, throughout the whole phone experience, it will increase the font size. And I discovered, like I said, to my horror, that having it on extra large is now required. I'm basically slowly going blind.
Yeah, typography, that's what we're moving to now, is really something where I thought I couldn't tell. I bet you can. I've noticed this. When people share designs that look really fabulous, I kind of find myself going and looking at the fonts that they've chosen for their design, and nearly always is it something that they've selected. Maybe it's just a free one that's available, but it's not one of the Google fonts that I would go for because they're there. And you just think, I'm always in awe of these people who just manage to somehow deliver the right font. And it's not just that, is it? It's their pairings, it's the systems that some people have. And I meant to check this out for this talk because there are various systems. I think it was Chantel, I always get a name wrong. Edward Betsy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, who was talking about this. She's been looking into this, and there are certain proportions, certain ratios that you set for your fonts that make things look good. And I think if you know this stuff and you do it, you can tell.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Yeah, you're right, of course. And I probably would, on some level, notice it, but it never seems to bubble up to the top of my consciousness. I'm not often finding myself... For example, the time I think when I'm exposed to most fonts would probably be in a supermarket. You know, every product has got a different font. They're trying to reach out and, make themselves look happy, or they make themselves look exciting, or whatever it might be, or reliable, or whatever. And I just don't. I just see the word and think, okay, that's Tabasco sauce. That's that's baked beans or whatever it might be. But it's fascinating that you do dwell on it. That's really interesting.
Well, I'm starting to, because I'm just not good at design, and I feel I need to be better, and I just appreciate it when people are. So I feel like I need to understand a bit more about the characters and, behind it. I mean, it is psychology stuff that interests me, really, picking the right typography. They do communicate something different. And of course, there's the functional side of things. And interesting enough, I mean, going back to the whole Google thing with the variable fonts and being able to deliver fast, more kind of better typography. I've just set up a new blog that I'm doing, and guess what I've gone for? Georgia font.
Nice.
The system font.
Yeah, but it's reliable. You don't have to do anything. It's just there on everybody's machine, and it will definitely be quick to load.
Yeah, so I mean, some of those, well, we've forgotten about those, going back to those old system fonts, because as soon as Google came with it, suddenly we were stuck with it for all our experience where we learned the web. That's all we had, isn't it? We
Yeah.
just had to pick safe fonts.
Yeah.
And now,
Do you know what? I mean, although I say all of that kind of thing, I'm not advocating that Georgia should be everywhere or everybody must use Helvetica
Yeah.
or anything. But the world would be a duller place if we didn't have all of this. You know, the example of the supermarket, it would be, although I'm not really noticing it, it would be a much more bland world had we not got people obsessing about this.
A wonderful thing has happened, actually. I'm going to keep quiet for the moment. I'm doing a website which has been going on for a long time for an existing client who I really like and done lots of work for. And they're really, I mean, they're designing it and they've really got the design skills.
Nice.
much more knowledgeable on this stuff. But the interesting thing was with the typography, they've been asking me, can we get this font? I said, yes, you can, but you need to pay for it and the web license for it, and they've never done it. Anyway, I found something which is Google font close to what they wanted. I said, I've stuck this one in. And they actually, because they know what they're doing now, they went and changed it to Helvetica. So, and they're really happy with it. But I know what's actually happening on their computers. They've got the version of Helvetica that they want to see. So
I see.
To them, it's wonderful. To me, it looks a little bit off. So
Right,
yeah,
it's just what they're familiar with. Yeah.
it's
Interesting.
on their system. So yeah.
Okay, so that's web fonts and a smattering of typography. That's interesting. What are we going next? SEO. The purpose of writing more and more is just to, you imagine it, just a few years ago, almost nobody had to be skilled at writing in the way that millions of people now need to be skilled at writing, because previously the only road to writing was either for your own personal, maybe a diary or something, or if you were paid to do it, maybe a journalist, or maybe you're involved in marketing a product or something. But now, and of course there was no SEO, there was no thought of having to write it with search engine compatibility in mind. You just wrote, I guess, to whatever template was required for the style that you were choosing. But now we've got millions of people obsessing about the structure of their writing so that an algorithm can pick up on it. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, WordPress is there and popular because it's a blogging platform when blogging platforms were a way to make a new income. You know, the whole content marketing online stuff started and everybody wants to get in that to their business. But it is interesting, I think, where we've got to now, because the other side of this is the AI side of it. Now we've got to that point, haven't we, where we can get the robots to write our content as well, so we can put more out there to Google to search. And I think we're in a really interesting place at the moment with that.
It's really interesting as well because there's so many constraints that are applied to SEO. I wonder if anybody who is a writer actually revels in the SEO side of things. I wonder if there's a single writer who doesn't feel constrained by it, who feels it's like it's freeing and marvelous and it allows me to do so many great things. Because, we've got things like the length, the amount of words that you've decided to adopt, the propensity of keywords that you wish to be ranked for and where to put them, title tags, meta descriptions, all of this kind of stuff suddenly becomes really important. You've got to worry about packing things in a way that nobody ever used to have to.
Yeah, I mean, more worrying is the people who only write for the SEO purposes of it. And interestingly enough, I've moved to an SEO plugin, a Slim SEO, which I'm using on most of it, which is something which we were talking about him earlier, Justin Tadlock, who writes for WP Tavern. He also used that, and he made he reviewed that particular plugin, and he talked about the fact that for him, there might be some things that it's lacking, but for him, he doesn't want to be bothered about this. He wants to just get on with the business of writing, and this just does the main things that he needs to do in terms of SEO. And I think, that's kind of going to be true for most of the people I'm going to serve. That's
interesting as well, isn't it? Because for some people, so for example, Justin's working for a well-respected publication with a boatload of traffic and respect. And so I guess in a certain sense, the SEO play is of less consequence because it's probably being ranked by Google really well already. But I'm presuming that there are other people who are, they're trying to launch their blog and sell widgets, and they need to make sure that Google knows they sell widgets and just how effective they are at selling widgets. So I presume there are a bunch of people for whom the SEO stuff really has to matter.
Do you think still, though, when you go, you're Google searching and you find articles, do you feel often that you land on them and you think this has just been written for SEO purposes?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time, especially how-tos. I find myself asking Google how to do a myriad of things every week.
Yeah.
There's something that I need to do that I've never done before, and you get to the article and it's so obviously without any merit. There is no actual how-to information. It's just they've just somehow managed to persuade Google that this was in fact a helpful article. And that bamboozles me all the time. And you just click the back button and you're off again. Try something else, and usually you stumble upon something. But it is amazing still how effective people are at faking it to Google.
Yeah, I think Google will find a way to be able to take care of that.
Yes.
I mean, we know that they're already against the idea of using AI. In fact, it's one of their policies. If you don't do that without putting some human input into using that, they want to ban you for that, even if I think it's almost impossible at the moment for them to be able to work out when it's been created by robots. But I think maybe we're in a time where, a kind of flair or a character that you bring into your writing will mean something again. And I think maybe Google will find a way to be able to sort of compensate so the good stuff gets through and not the generated for their purposes stuff. It's
an interesting parallel, isn't it? Because if you think about it, people are prepared to pay significantly more money. I don't know, let me try and find an example. Furniture, for example. They're prepared to pay significantly more money for a table that they know an artisan has created by hand than one from, say, IKEA. I mean, both of them with a tablecloth over them, they're the same. Who would know? But people are prepared to respect the fact that somebody's put a load of time in and effort in and made this object, and it's unique and it's been done by somebody carefully, thoughtfully.
Yeah.
And maybe the same will be true ultimately with writing. We'll all spot that, boy, this feels like an AI has written this, and that will become less popular. And I've got to imagine that there must be something in the Google algorithm that is figuring out whether this has been written by AI. Because Google can't want AI to be the thing. I can't imagine.
No, they're very specific about it. They've actually written to that effect that they don't, if it's not, it's one of their kind of bannable things. So I've definitely seen that. So if you're just writing with the technologies like GPT-3, isn't it? That's you have to train. But if they know it's been written without any manual input to it, they've written that they can quite happily delist you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the idea of some of the software that's come around to enable you to use AI. So there's this new WordPress plugin, Bertha.ai, but there's also a whole suite of SaaS apps which do the same thing. I think the way that they skirt around it is to describe their product as it just gets you started. It will put things in your way that you that you may not have thought of, and then very much from there you're on your own. Don't just push 10,000 words out that the AI wrote. Go and look, get some ideas, delete things, modify things. So we'll have to see how that goes. And that brings into mind some other, it's not the same thing at all, but it's sort of similar. I suppose you could put it under AI a little bit, is things like Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, which are both softwares which will look at the writing you've already done and make decisions to help you write a little bit more effectively. So give you tips about style and obviously basic things like punctuation and grammar. But I use those quite a lot, and I'm always amazed at how verbose I am and how many more words I pack in than I need to, especially the word that.
Yeah, I think the same. I use Pro Writing Aid with you put me onto it, and I turn it off most of the time because as you know, I'm terrible at writing when we're typing to each other, but so it's constantly correcting me. But sometimes I feel it's a little bit over the top. It's for brevity, but sometimes you need it. And do you know what? I think they're very different, actually. So Grammarly and pro writing aids and things like Bertha, I think they're different. Why I think Grammarly and stuff will help you to slim down your own style and make it easy to read for other people, where I think the AI stuff, might help you with the SEO at the moment, but it's not going to help you with the conversion. And I think Grammarly will help you with the conversion. It will tidy up what you're writing.
I'm the same as you. I switch it off whilst I'm writing because I find the way that it interferes with the visual interface. Let's say you've got a Google Doc open because it's compatible with that, or Gutenberg or whatever. It's constantly instructing you by underlining things in bold colours and what have you that this needs addressing, and I finish what I'm doing, then switch it on, go away, make a cup of tea, and come back, and all the suggestions have been thought out, and then I just go through and dismiss them or use them as I see fit. But it is really helpful. You and I both went to school in an era when grammar wasn't popular to be taught. Basically, you and I, we had to learn grammar by osmosis. It really was not in fashion, and so I would imagine there's a whole generation of people just like you and me for whom that it's not instinctive, and we never really got taught it.
I'm older than you. I had chalk and a slate.
Did you not get taught grammar though, or did you get taught? Because I definitely didn't.
I don't think I did.
No.
I mean, Lincolnshire education really wasn't kind of hot on that kind of stuff,
That's right. We were taught about cattle and how to farm, things like
things that were going to be more important to our lives.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. What about the nature of the writing that we're doing? There's a whole ton of stuff in here. So, for example, blogging platforms, forums, documentation, the different styles of writing that you could get involved in. That's important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what we can say on this, actually.
Well, I guess it's just good to point it out. There are a whole myriad of different reasons for writing. So if you're a blogger, I guess the constraints are off, aren't they? You can pretty much write whatever you like in your own style. Nobody's going to be critical of you. It's just the way it's done. You can be politically hostile, or you could be gentle, whatever it is that you want to be. And then I guess the writing, for example, in forums, you've got to modify the way that you do things. Hopefully you're going to try not to inflame people and be constructive and helpful and polite and all those kind of things. And then if you're into writing documentation for something, let's say you've got a WordPress plugin, there's definitely a style that you've got to adopt, and it might be a little bit less interesting, shall we say, certainly less personal. But there's a whole different suite of ways to write.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we were just talking earlier, this is going a little bit off topic, but it's, I guess, related to Grammarly and picking up on your that's. And we were saying about, because we both have to talk to camera occasionally because we do kind of video content. And you were saying you had to read stuff and you became robotic.
Yep.
Not your normal character. And I find the same. I can read out aloud what I've written to somebody and it seems fine. If I try and do that before camera, it just doesn't seem right. And somehow this is where I think Grammarly and pro writers sometimes don't help you, because if I talk and I say so and then move on to my next topic, it's not good grammar, but it kind of is my voice coming through the writing.
Yeah.
So I sometimes think, that's, and you do, I think when you're blogging, I think somehow it's got to be most of the time, it's got to be your voice, where you're right with the documentation. It's not, people just need the information they need to achieve a goal.
Yeah. I have written documentation in the past, and I found it really a difficult job to do, largely because it just doesn't fit almost any of my attributes, and so I get bored with it quickly, so I tend to wander off. So the job which should take 20 minutes takes 5 hours, and so I'm very, very non-effective. That's not a word, is it? But anyway, ineffective, that's the word I was after. But this is why I don't do any public speaking, because I know that if I read out the text, if I write everything and then read it verbatim, I will be wooden, and it will be horrible for anybody to listen to. But if I don't write out the text, I won't be on message. If I just write bullet points out, I just wander off and I just get totally lost down a blind alley. So no public speaking for Nathan. I'm all right winging it like this. I can talk for hours. But if it's got to be on message, like at a WordCamp or something, yeah, it's not for me.
I know, and it's fascinating. It takes me back to my university days because I'm kind of like this. I remember the lecturers who had long standing and credibility, who I really enjoyed, were often the ones who never finished on time. So they would have like their hour slot or something, but it would like me a little bit if I'm useless at public speaking, but I do the same kind of thing. I wander around the stage here, just kind of riffing off the top of my head, and and go completely off or get lost. And that's what the ones that used to engage me used to do that. And then, of course, there were these new lecturers who used to do the public speaking, who would pretty much follow American textbook or something on the subject, and it would have clear headings and it would cover each of the points that were in there. But for me, it was always dull.
Yeah.
So maybe you should do public speaking.
Oh, no, nobody wants to be put through that horror. It just something sort of occurred to me. I went to play some sport with my sons the other day, and went into the gym and quickly thought, I don't ever want to be in this room. There's nothing about the gym that excites me. Swimming pool, that's kind of nice. I quite like that. And badminton, yeah, I'll do that. Table tennis, whatever. All these different things. So they're all sport, but they're completely different. And it's the same, I suppose, with writing. It's all writing, but there's different styles and there's different ways of doing it. So we mentioned blogging, forums, documentation. There's obviously other things like newsletters or, brief content, sales, marketing, copy. The list, and obviously novels and long form prose and poetry and all sorts. And I guess it just depends. Some people are going to be more into reading as well as writing, all of those different types. And I would imagine not everybody can be good at all of it.
Yeah, and you've just kind of, I guess, solved something for me. I think that's the point of the blogging, isn't it? I think most of the time the blogging is personal. It needs to find your voice, and I think that's probably why AI won't be able to manage to replicate that. And that's why we spot things are either made for SEO, because there's just not a real person talking to you about their life.
I guess the Turing test for writing from AI will be the moment when it can actually make me laugh. Will it ever be able to write down a joke that it's created in a context of a story? There's a big build up like some comedians do. They spend 10 minutes getting to the line, which is just, that was all coming to this moment. Will it ever be able to do that? That would be the moment. And at that point, I think I'm just going to give up and assume that the robots have won.
You know what? I mean, I bought one of these AI tools. I think it's called Writer, but it's spelled, I think, R-Y-T.
See, they start with an R. They're right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting. It's got a humorous mode on it, so you can get it to write in humorously. It doesn't work. It's never made me laugh once, but
maybe that's the joke. It's the the irony button. It doesn't work because it's ironic. It's not supposed to be funny. Okay, let's crack on. So we know there's loads of different styles of writing. I put down the idea of the interface mattering when writing. So when I was a kid, the interface was a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper. And then when I got to be about 8, along came computers. But they weren't for writing. There was just the impediments to it all were so great that it was useless. But now we're at the point where, certainly where I live, there are devices littering all over the place. So obviously you can still use your pencil and paper. But now we've got to the point where the style of writing that you're about to perform really means that you may open something or reach for something completely different. And so an example might be, at least once a week, I will go into Evernote, which I'm sure you've all heard of Evernote. But one of the options that you can do is basically create a list. And every time you click return, it then creates a new line, but with a checkbox next to it. And the idea being that once your list is complete, you can go back through and just tick, 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 tick. So, for example, I might use that on shopping. And that's a really brilliant case of writing for a purpose in an interface which matters. For blogging on WP Builds, I'm using Gutenberg, and it works supremely well. I can move the content up and down. Links are handled really well now. There's occasionally when I don't want it to become a link, but I can convert that back. And sometimes it tries to drag in the featured image and things like that, which I don't want. But for writing for the blog, It's perfect. I use Google Docs quite a lot because it's clutter free. There's just nothing really getting in the way. A very minimal interface, which I quite like. But then there's all sorts of other writing apps. Like there's one for, I think it's Windows and Mac, probably more, I don't know, but called Scrivener, which is for authors to create basically novels, and it brings into the interface all sorts of information that you need to hand about the story at large. So it brings in portraits of the characters, and it brings in information about what you're intending this chapter to be, so that you can be mindful of the wider story at the same time. So I think the interface there's just so many now.
Yeah. You put this down as a note, and I thought, what are you on about? But I actually think it's quite significant. And it made me think about Gutenberg. I mean, you and I are slightly different. You like writing with that for the post that you do for WP Builds. It really works well for you.
Yep.
And I'm not such a big fan. But I realized that I was talking about the fact that I like Google Documents. If I needed to write something like a blog post or something, I'd probably rather do it there.
Yep.
But it depends how sectioned off your content is and how you're imagining it on the site. So I wouldn't write in a Google document unless I was kind of mapping out a home page or something. I might put some titles there to sort of think about my thoughts. But when it comes to writing on a home page or something, I want to do it with the font that's there and the space that's available. So I'm back into my page builder, wanting to see it as it will show on the page.
That's fascinating.
Influence the length of my sentences, because how it's going to sit well on the page.
So that's a really interesting moment where fonts and typography and the interface collide. And all of it, in your case, you want to see it and make the length of it so that it fits in that box perfectly. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it does. I think it does matter, and you are in different modes for this. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. And actually, it will change, I think, how you interact with WordPress and like Gutenberg or not, because what you're using it for.
It's interesting as well, because in this, and we'll come back to this in a little bit, in this, I was thinking, the whole time I was thinking about bigger pieces of writing. So, Gutenberg is for fairly lengthy pieces, potentially. So's a Google Docs. So potentially could be Evernote and what have you, and Scrivener and all of those kind of things. But then we'll come to social media. Very often the context there is to be as brief as possible. These incredibly popular apps which have swept the world, starting with text SMS a long time ago, just brief, punchy little messages. And my friends my children's friends, that is the mode of communication now. Brief, to the point, punchy, punctuated with GIFs and emojis. It's just so different from what we had as kids.
Yeah. But we were talking earlier about this, and you said, your thing is, has the world gone all with Twitter? Is that the way, is writing going to die out, which is kind of what you were thinking about? And I was just thinking, I just think it's a different form of communication that has one context.
Yeah.
I think the younger generation, it's a new tool that's available. Emojis are something that, I've grown to love. I couldn't believe that could ever happen. I just thought they were just so childish and stupid, but a great way of communicating an emotion.
Yeah. Do you know what? I remember almost being like cynical when somebody would send an emoji my way. I'd be like, oh, come on. Grow up. Yeah. And now I'm like, I'm emoji crazy. I love it. I mean, I've got this limited, tiny palette of ones that I use. The sort of the wink to sort of indicate that actually that was ironic, because I can't help but be sarcastic. And sometimes I write to people and think, actually, that's maybe too subtle and that could come across as like hurtful. So I add the wink in, and I'm mindful. Well, I'm thinking at that point, well, that clears that mess up. Of course, doesn't always end up having to apologise. But yeah, here's an interesting fact that most people maybe do or don't know. Writing was not invented for the beautiful things that we all imagine it was invented for. So obviously everybody lauds Shakespeare and the great works of prose throughout the centuries, and we all think this is what writing was invented for. It wasn't. Writing was invented in ancient Sumer. It was on clay tablets, and they would press these reeds into clay tablets in certain configurations, and it was called cuneiform. And cuneiform initially was an accounting system. So it was basically, so the oldest clay tablets that we've got with cuneiform on are things like, you owe me 3 sheep, you owe me 6 bushels of wheat, or whatever it might be. And only much later, I mean, much later in the march of history of the world, it's not that much later, but in human terms, it was quite a lot. Only much later did it start to be repurposed for things like, oh, actually, we could start writing fun things down instead, and things that we want to remember, as opposed to just bookkeeping stuff.
Interesting.
There you
now,
go.
what other WordPress podcasts would you learn that kind of stuff?
That's right. You heard it here first. Cuneiform. Yeah, I actually wrote an essay about this at university, so that's why that's why I got on my high horse. But it is fascinating, because it is just an odd thought to think that writing didn't come about in order to so that we can use our voice to communicate and be emotional. It really, really was the sort of stuff that you receive from your bank. You know, nobody's getting excited about the bank statement when it arrives, are they?
No, but you know what? Something just occurred to me when you said that you put a little wink on because you thought it could be interpreted as sarcastic.
Yeah.
I somehow think, in a way, the emoji then can spoil things a little bit because it makes it so obvious what you're doing. And there is nothing bigger, a big laugh out loud, for when you read something and it takes you a moment to realize what they're actually saying to you.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
There's a bigger laugh, isn't there, where you're slightly confused about somebody's intention and then you get it. Yeah.
So I wonder if emojis can be considered writing. I wonder if they contain the kernel of what writing is. You know, if they add something in a visual form, is it writing? Here's another question. Is consuming audio content reading? So a perfect example of this is if you subscribe to Audible, which it's Amazon's thing. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of rival services, but I don't know the names of them. And you listen to an audiobook. Have you read it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think a lot of people do say they have.
They do. They say they've read the book. And to me, reading is things coming through the eyes. But then, of course, that brings into mind the whole accessibility thing, because there's a whole bunch of people who will communicate. Let's say, for example, they might be reading via Braille, so it's coming through the fingers. And so if it's coming through the fingers, couldn't it come through the eyes as well as the ears? And it's just fascinating.
Do you know what? That's one thing when we're talking about accessibility. One thing I don't know, I've never tested this out, because I do have on my computer one of the tools, and we should do these. I never use it enough, which is, I'm looking up what it's called. It's called, I think I've written it down.
Yeah, NVDA.
DA. Yeah, that's the one that I use to just simulate what a screen reader will have when someone's reminded me about accessibility. But one thing I don't know is how it deals with emojis.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Because you imagine it would contain some metadata about what it is. So, you know, it might say wink or something. It's actually quite interesting when you look at an emoji in an app that can't parse it, and you often see like it just got some quirky characters and then it says wink or you know, laugh out loud or something. You think, what? Oh, okay, that was supposed to be an emoji, and maybe that's going to be passed over to the screen reader. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I guess it can do. I guess it's built into the system, but it popped up as a question. I was just going
to say on our show notes, which we write in Google Doc, by the way. So there you go. We've obviously decided upon that as the best method. We missed a bunch out, so let's flip back up. Let's go further back up to the top, and we'll look at the mood, the writing, the writing, and the mood that you're in. As an example, we've all done it. We've all been forced to write things to a time constraint, and it is amazing how that process can work in both ways. You know, it might motivate you perfectly. On the other hand, it might be that it just grinds your gears, and the fact that you've got to write to a schedule makes you feel pressure and what have you. So what I'm speaking of here is, you know, the pleasure of writing could be completely different. The experience of writing could be completely different, because you're writing for business, you're writing for pleasure, you're writing because you're under pressure, you're writing because your boss is forcing you to, or you're writing because you just love writing poetry. It makes a real difference.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, if I was needed to be paid for writing, then I would just seize up and not be able to do it because I'm not a writer. But I do love writing when it's for my own pleasure. In fact, building websites is pretty much the same thing. I've realized over the time, if I've got a very loose deadline and thinking time, I can enjoy it. I can potter about with it, experiment with stuff, and writing's the same for that. If you need the mood, I couldn't do it to a time frame.
Did you ever keep a diary at any point?
Yeah, I think I did, but really for a very short time.
Yeah,
when I was
I'm
young.
the same. I've dabbled with it, and it was obvious really soon that I just couldn't get into the flow of what was needed. Mine just became a really boring list of things that I'd done that day, and it just was really utilitarian. So I thought, well, this is pointless. I'm never going to enjoy reading this back. So I quickly stopped. What about this expertise then? Is it wise to, if let's say, for example, you've got a website, getting back to WordPress a bit, if you've got a website, is it the best thing to do to employ a copywriter, or are we okay with letting the client send us whatever it is that they've got, or indeed you writing it for them?
Yeah, I feel I've I've read a fair bit. I've read a lot of the copy blogger books and stuff like that before, so I could kind of bring those skills in because of the terrible, stuff that I used to get submitted. Because, a lot of the clients that I had, their only experience of having to write is what they've been taught at school. And, and most of the kind of local trade stuff end up being the same, where, a local family run business and it's blah, blah, it all says exactly the same stuff, So they needed to find their voices. So I think I learned a bit to be able to do that. And since there's not been a budget for my clients anyway to get in a copywriter. But honestly, I think if selling, copy's about selling, isn't it? Communicating your kind of brand to somebody. If there's if I had a client with a budget, I would love it to send that stuff over to a copywriter, because I'm assuming that copywriter, if they understand the web, will do kind of the branding for me. They will say what the character of this site is all about and pass that to me.
Yeah. I think
and give me the structure as well.
I think you're right. I think if you've got the capacity, having somebody who really knows what they're doing is really good. You mentioned copy blogger, but there's also people like Todd E. Jones and his Copy Flight things. Who they help you try to figure out what it is that your audience need from you, and then provide you with the tools to sort of write effectively. So yeah, I think you're right. It obviously anybody can write. That's kind of the purpose of WordPress. And if it's a blog and it doesn't really matter, and you're just writing personal stuff down, then probably a good idea to get somebody to maybe cast an eye on it if you're very nervous about it. But you don't need somebody to help you write it. But if you're writing something and you wish it to be effective, and you genuinely didn't learn that trade, then I would imagine there's utility in getting somebody who has learnt that trade to look at it. Yeah.
But I think when it comes to copy bloggers, funny, isn't it, as a term? Because copy is very much about sales. But when I think of blogging, it's kind of not related to, a good blogger for me is someone who's just able to kind of just feels free enough to be able to write down how they talk.
Yeah.
And I get a personality, which they're not, they're not, what they're doing shouldn't be designed to sell me something.
Yeah.
It should literally be, something that engages and entertains, as if I'm listening to them talk to me personally.
Yeah.
So, for those kind of things.
Yeah, interesting.
Those skills.
We touched on this, so we maybe don't want to dwell on it because we are approaching 40 minutes, so we probably need to wrap up fairly soon. But the sort of brevity of communication now is quite interesting. I mentioned earlier that the world got into SMS in a big way. Certainly in Europe, I think it was a little bit later in North America. I remember going to America during a time when everybody was texting back home, and was quite surprised to discover that nobody was using it. And then, of course, it took off, and now we've got all sorts of platforms which encourage us to write in a very constrained way. And I wonder, like, if you're an educator and you're educating children and teenagers, I wonder if this has made a difference. I wonder if the world is becoming less skilled at writing long form and very, very skilled at writing briefly and cutting out all the cruft that you don't need.
Yeah.
You have nothing to add to that, do you? I've confounded you.
But it is. But it's so big. It's such a big topic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That I find that. I don't know. It's. I just think that whole stuff is just a new form of communication.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a need, isn't there, for people to feel connected. But I also think it's kind of bad for a younger generation as well. They don't know how to disconnect and enjoy a moment of living in the moment where they are. So
we're in danger here of becoming curmudgeons. We must.
Yeah.
Careful, move away. It's interesting though. I wonder what the attention span is, because nowadays, like, the best thing you got as a kid was a book with coloured pictures, and if you were really lucky, you maybe got a pop-up book or something. You'd open the page and things would flop out in front of you, and it's exciting. But nowadays, if you think about it, the children are. Everything is in the one piece. It could have beautiful typography, lovely, vibrant colours, pictures that could have only been taken seconds ago on the other side of the planet. There can be video in there. They can even drop games in and interactive content and all of that kind of stuff. And it's just fascinating. Writing, the consumption of writing is so much bigger now than it was when we were kids, because it literally was reading text. Now there's so much more thrown in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for younger generation, I mean, I think, oh gosh, it's so enabling, the fact that you've got the internet and you can find out information, you can connect with people who share a very niche interest that you couldn't do when we were growing up. And I just think, it's so engaging, and you see why people want to be connected all the time like that. But I think all of us, I don't think it's just our age here. I think you and I feel the same. We've engaged particularly with Facebook quite a lot, and then needed to pull that back because we're just kind of losing balance in our life.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Excuse me. Something just came to mind when you said that, the sort of interaction. I kind of figured if you'd have told me 10 years ago that I'd have a video camera in my pocket that I could use to talk to my parents on video, I would have assumed that would have replaced almost all written communication, that everybody would be communicating with their face on a video. And it really hasn't happened, has it? The preferred communication still is to write to one another. Like you and I, we write to each other. We get on the call to do the podcast, but we don't do FaceTime calls or any of that kind of video stuff. But yet we're chatting and chirping away the whole time in different messaging platforms. And so writing, it totally works. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think AI or modern technology or different things that may threaten the predominance of writing, I doubt that they'll actually have the impact of removing writing from our abilities.
Yeah, and you love reading, don't you?
I love reading.
There must be something there that the other platforms can't offer you. So I don't think it's going to go away, and that's the same for many people. I'm not so much. It should be the other way around, where I'm fearing that writing will disappear because I'm not such a big reader,
Last one. Let's drag it back to WordPress a little bit just before we finish. What about the ownership of your writing then? Because is this an important thing? Obviously, WordPress's mission: democratize publishing, make it so that you don't have to go to a third-party platform. It's yours. You can delete it or neglect it if you like, or you can curate it and back it up and make sure that it's there for as long as you wish it to be there. But increasingly, we're seeing third-party platforms. So, as an example, Medium is a really popular tool, and there's some other ones, and their names have gone out of my head. There's one which is really popular for writing newsletters. I think it's called Substack. Yes, I'll go with Substack. People are quite happy to do their writing and have it owned by other people. Now, I confess I haven't read the terms and conditions. Maybe they don't own it. Maybe they say it's yours, but we'll host it for you and what have you. I don't know, in exchange for ad revenue or something. But I'm just curious as to whether or not you believe owning it's important.
I think, by default, copyright goes to you anyway. It's kind of just a natural legal thing, isn't it? So they can't really take that. It's about what they can do with it, whether they can monetize it, whether you have that control about where it's displayed is what you lose. It's interesting because we were recording this at the week where Facebook went down for 6 hours, and I've seen so many people saying, remind everybody it's a good time to own your own content, and have your own sites. And I don't know on this one. I believe it is still. I believe you want a little space of the internet that's yours, and that, not only do you own the copyright, but you can decide where that content is going to be displayed and when.
I was thinking as people were writing those thoughts, like, yeah, Facebook's gone down for 6 hours. I was thinking, websites never go down, do they? Hosting companies never have glitches. No update to any plugin or theme will ever cause your website to go down. So it's a curious argument. Although you may have different opinions on Facebook and Twitter and whether they're good custodians of your content, I think it's remarkable how much uptime they have. Really, it's that's the reason it's so shocking when Facebook et al. Go down for 6 hours, because, well, it's unprecedented. But of course, obviously, the scale of that collapse internationally, and it would appear that lots of people literally couldn't get on with their work because they rely on Facebook groups or messaging systems that are owned by Facebook. So that was quite interesting. Throw one last thing in, which is a plugin called, well, not necessarily a plugin, it's a service, but it is a plugin called WordProof, which is quite an interesting idea. It uses blockchain technology to prove categorically that your writing is in fact your own. So you can timestamp it on a blockchain and categorically say, this is mine, I know it's mine, I produced it first, nah. And I don't know what you would do with that, but you can do it.
Yeah, for some people that's really important. For me, I've never even thought I needed that, but I did see it and I thought, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I will never need that, but I imagine if you're a lawyer or something, the timing of the writing is crucial,
Yes, if you're sharing, earth-shattering ideas through your blog or something, that could,
Well, we're on safe ground then. There's no earth-shattering ideas coming out of this episode, but I think we've covered it, haven't we?
We have indeed. Let's talk about our last one, shall we?
Last one? What are you talking about? We've got X, Y, and Z to do.
Yes, but we're combining them.
Oh, why is that?
Oh, gosh, because there's not much we can do with it. But what we're going to do is, I guess we're going to summarize what we don't do in WordPress and why we do certain things. And then our Z is going to represent it's time to put this series to bed.
Love it.
It's terrible.
It's basically because we really couldn't think of anything to do for the last week. I love that X is becoming like basically delete. Y, the letter Y is becoming the word Y, and Z is just a set of Zs, like the traditional going to sleep. That's such a kludge. Brilliant. I'm glad you came up
we could do something on XYZ, the top level domain name, couldn't we?
You've discovered that's like the 6th most popular or something.
Yeah, I Googled it. That's what it said.
Wow.
I don't know why. I just wondered what anybody did for XYZ.
Well,
and that's all I came up with.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, well, that'll be next time. As always, lovely chatting to you. Have a nice couple of weeks, and I'll see you soon.
Too.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode. Always lovely to chat with my friend David. Really interesting subject. There was way more in that than we thought when we started out down this W is for writing course. We will be back in a couple of weeks with our final X, Y, and Z. But don't forget, we'll also have an interview next week as well. And as always, don't forget our This Week in WordPress show, which will be out live, 2 p.m. UK time, wpbuilds.com/live. You can see that, and then we'll repurpose that and put it out as a podcast on Tuesday morning. Okay, one last reminder, please do go and bookmark wpbuilds.com/black and make use of those links so that, well, if they're an affiliate link, WP Builds might get a little bit of coffee money, which would be really nice. And as I said, it does keep the lights on, and really appreciate your support with that. Okay, that's it. We'll be back, as I said, with some more content later in the week. For now, stay safe. I'm going to fade in really some unbelievably cheesy music this week and say bye-bye for now.